Welcome once again to Historic Investments. Today, we're going to focus on gyrojets. You might say, which gyrojet? Aren't there a variety of gyrojets? I think the nomenclature is a little bit confusing. Our goal today is to take you through the gyrojets. In fact, what we're going to do is just focus on the pistols. So we're going to talk about the Model 137, the Mark 1A, the Mark 1B, and the Mark II. So with that in mind, and please, if you like what you hear, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and send us your comments. In 1960, two very gifted engineers, Robert Maynard and Arthur Beidel, formed MBA Associates in San Ramon, California. Over the course of the next few years, the company would not only go on to make a number of very desirable military products, but also introduced the rocket handgun, which was at the time and remains truly just a revolutionary concept in firearms development. As you can see from the spread, we've got a number of different Gyrojet firearms from the Model 137. We've got a Mark 1A series gun, a Mark 1B series gun, and while we don't have it, there's also a Mark II pistol. In all, Gyrojet handgun production, and including a small number of carbines, approached 1,900 firearms. So at this point, why don't we just look at some of the models individually so that you'll have a better idea what to consider when making your purchases. If you're a collector, you're interested in getting an early gun. In fact, the earlier the better. And so if you're interested in Gyrojets, the pistol that you should set as your holy grail is one of these Model 137s. And the gun is pretty interesting from a number of standpoints, which is very different from the other production pistols. So most of them, as you can see right here, were sold in wooden cases, which, by the way, were cases taken from Gerber knives. And in a block, there were 20 different rocket cartridges, not 20 different ones, but 20 rocket cartridges. Some of them are round nose, some of them have got a pointed nose, all of them have got a 4-point gas egress system, 4 jets at the bottom. But we're here to talk about the gun. So let's take a look at the Model 137. As with this example, most are gold-plated. Not all, some of them are blued, and they're marked Mark I, the majority, but again, not all, might be marked experimental, and they're serial numbered in the A prefix serial range. These very first guns were all chambered for the 12 millimeter rocket projectile. They're marked 137 on the right side of the casting, as you can see right here, Model 137, and caliber 49, and 49 again refers to the 12 millimeter cartridge. What are the physical characteristics that set this gun aside from later production? Okay, well, if you're looking at it closely, you could say, oh, something's missing here, and you would be right. This gun has got no barrel. Look at that. There are a few grooves on the inside, but these guns were correctly made without a barrel. Another thing, what about a loading gate for this for the launching platform? You're right again. That was one of the problems with this gun. In fact, the two biggest problems that caused the military to very quickly dismiss them as suitable small arm is, number one, they were inaccurate because the little rocket rounds bounced inside this little launching tube without a barrel, and number two, it was very easy for the little rockets to become misaligned when moving up the magazine area. Well, of course, MBA was discouraged, but moved forward. Many of the guns, as you see here, were then gold-plated and presented in these cases. So let's look at the next development. So how did MBA address those issues? Well, for one thing, further development had showed that a larger rocket projectile was going to be more accurate. So the rocket size was increased from 12 millimeters to 13 millimeters. Also, of course, we put in a barrel tube here, as you can see, and to address the problem with respect to round misalignment, now the loading area, or the launching pad area, was covered by a swiveling gate. These guns were continued in the same serial range as the 137, and it's estimated that in those 2 years of production, between 1963 and 1965, no more than 100 of these A-series pistols were produced. In 1965, MBA made a number of design changes eventually culminating in the Gyrojet, to which most people are familiar. For example, as a result of some internal changes, it was no longer necessary to use a screw, and you can see the screw head that's visible on the earlier gun. It was decided to mark the pistols with the caliber, as you can see here on the series or the Model B in the lower part of the frame. And most obviously, the rotating loading gate was replaced with a kind of a solid looking slide. And yes, indeed, it is a slide, but as you guys already know, it's not a slide in the conventional sense. It's basically just a cover to the loading platform. Between 1965 and 1968, approximately 1,100 of these pistols were made. Most were configured and finished in the manner of this pistol. You could also just order special order finishes. For example, some guns could be had with a satin nickel finish and black pearl grips. You could also get guns that were finished in a forest green. But all of this came to a screeching halt in 1968 when ATF decided that firearms shooting a bullet larger than 50 caliber were no longer acceptable. Those were to be considered destructive devices. And as a result of that regulation, MBA had to redesign the Mark I Model B for the third time. The new guns that were, in fact, the last production pistols have been alternatively referenced as Mark I Model Cs or simply Mark IIs, because these guns were again chambered for the 12mm cartridge, the same cartridge, and I say cartridge, it's really rocket, as was used for the Model 137. These guns also, per ATF regulation, were finished with a very, very shallowly rifled barrel, which in some ways kind of negates the benefits of having a gyroscopically a stabilized rocket projectile. These guns had a much lower price, but nevertheless were not particularly popular, and production ended in 1973 with only 600 Model 1Cs or Model 2s having been produced. So why were the Gyrojets basically a colossal failure? I mean, from a collector standpoint, they're great. There are lots of variations to choose from, but why weren't they more popular? Well, for one thing, they were, as mentioned previously, they were hugely inaccurate. I mean, it was difficult to hit a pie-shaped object at 50 yards, never mind 100 yards. Number two, the muzzle velocity was very low. Remember, this is like a rocket ship taking off. Very slow at the beginning and peak velocity not for many yards out. So if you're shooting somebody with a handgun and it's a close encounter, this little rocket didn't have enough penetrating ability at close range to be effective. If you're a hunter, there are even other problems. If you're shooting a rabbit or a squirrel and you happen to miss, the rocket would still be blasting out and you can cause a forest fire. If you were lucky enough to hit your game, which indeed would be lucky with a Gyrojet, it would be cooked before you could even retrieve it. So lots of problems with these guns. The ammo was expensive. It was just a problem on multiple fronts. So in the end, MBA finally threw up its hands, and as I said, production ended in 1973 after about 1,900 firearms of all flavors. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the Model 137, the Mark I A and B, and the Mark II. Hopefully you'll now have a little bit more information to consider before making your next collection acquisition. Good luck and good collecting.